I've managed over 1.5 million in ad spend to try and find out what the best approach is to get more inbound inquiries and clients. And this video is going to reveal all of the costs associated with running the campaigns, the analytics of the best and worst campaigns, and also all of the results that I got. Now you might be wondering what the best approach I tried was. Now there are 4 main ways that you can run ads on platforms like Facebook, Instagram or LinkedIn to get new clients. And the goal of this video is to show you those 4 methods and find out which one is the best, if any. Also, spoilers, there's a secret 5th approach I'm going to tell you at the end. So I started this journey to 1.5 million as a relative novice. Honestly, it wasn't the smoothest start, and I quickly learned why. We put together an ebook and we allowed prospects to exchange their contact information to be able to download the book. And after launching without much ad spend, we managed to quickly get leads coming in consistently at a really low lead cost of £10.16, and we managed to convert about 5% of those leads into new clients using a variation of the follow-up sequence that I cover in this video, which you can also find on the channel. So seeing that this was consistently working for us, we decided to run it for some clients that we had at the time. We saw a lead cost of roughly $8 to $15 on average, but this is where we started to see some problems, and it made absolutely no sense. A lot of our clients were really struggling to get the closes.
But you can't do this to me.
And a very small amount of clients weren't even really getting many leads from the approach.
You know how much I sacrificed?
And honestly, I felt completely defeated. We'd run it for ourselves and it had worked, so why wasn't it working for these other people? But I didn't give up. I did a little bit more investigating and I uncovered one of the most important lessons that I'd learned throughout this entire process. Oh, and I also found a way to make sales conversions way easier, and I'll show you that in a second. So firstly, just in terms of generating leads, we found that the most important factor for Whitepapers was giving away something that they would actually normally pay for. So overtly corporate, dry, boring, wordy ebooks just don't work. The white paper or whatever it is you're giving away has to highlight that the lead has a fundamental problem that your service can help resolve. For example, the ebook that we gave away around how to run LinkedIn ads highlights that the lead probably wants to run LinkedIn ads and also doesn't really know how. And therefore they would benefit from our services such as our course, our one-on-one mentorship, or even our done-for-you advertising services. All of which, by the way, can be found in the description if you feel like you need help. But beyond all that, I wanted to understand why some of these people getting white paper leads weren't able to convert them into clients. And I found the answer. All the prospects are doing when they download any sort of resource is highlighting that they have the problem and giving you their contact information. They haven't said that they want to use your product or service. It's top of funnel marketing and it does what it needs to do. And we found that every time these leads weren't closing, they were either not being followed up with at all, or they were being followed up with in a way that didn't line up with where they were in the funnel. So the approach I found to increase sales conversions that I mentioned earlier was this. Use the lead form to get them to download the white paper and then send them to some sort of landing page that upsells them to something a little bit more committal, such as a free demo, free trial, or a free consultation call. Additionally, when you follow up with these leads, you want to start with questions about their situation and find out if they actually need any help with it, instead of just pitch slapping. So in terms of a tier for the approach, I'm putting this as a C tier approach. It works, but it requires a lot of nurturing and sales outreach over a period of time, and most companies aren't very good at this. But how does this approach stack up against using a lead form to promote an offer much closer to your service? So after we weren't seeing as much success with white papers, we decided to promote an offer that was much closer to the sale. And honestly, it was a little bit of a slow start. We got our first lead in after spending about $200 in ad spend, and honestly that can work. But at the time we were massively undercharging for our services, and as a result we needed to bring that lead cost down. So again, I went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out how we could lower that lead cost. And through a little bit of trial and error, I found a formula that enabled us to do just that. The main thing it revolved around was the framing of the offer. Now, the best offer on LinkedIn is usually some form of free consultation, free trial, or free demo. And we found that the best way to frame your offering is we help X, and that would be your audience, to achieve Y, and that is their ideal outcome, in Z time period to make it like tangible, and then in brackets without and something they're currently doing that they hate, or even an objection. And to my shock, the videos that we'd put out there hadn't performed amazingly well, which didn't really make much sense because it gave people more context, and we'd seen video perform well on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. So we ended up trying some single image ads, and surprisingly we found that that reduced the lead cost significantly. Then we started to scale the approach, and I started to see some patterns. The schedule rate seemed to be really low, so people would say yes, I'm interested, and then they'd just ghost. They'd be really hard to get in contact with. And a personal experience I had with someone else's marketing led me to understand exactly what was happening. So I wanted to update the website builder we were using for campaigns so I had a little bit more functionality. Honestly, at that exact moment in time, it was the biggest issue that we had in the business, and it was genuinely keeping me up at night. So I signed up for free trials and guided demos of at least 4 platforms, and do you want to know what happened? Absolutely nothing. 2 of the platforms I just never heard back from, and then of the other 2, one of them left me a voicemail a week later asking me to call them back, and the other one emailed me twice, again a week later, with some lackluster, boring email. And do you want to know what happened in that week between me submitting that lead form and then finally hearing from these people? Life. Don't get me wrong, it was still an issue that I had, but my priorities had shifted. I thought, if these guys can't even be bothered to get in contact with me, their service must suck. Now eventually I did end up switching. Funnily enough, I ended up switching because I saw an ad for a platform on Facebook, and I submitted a lead form for a free demo. And at the time of me submitting that lead form, I was in a bit of a rush, so I didn't end up actually scheduling a time for the demo. But they immediately started sending me a sequence of emails, SMS messages, and they even called me at different times of the day, and it wasn't pushy. Like, they were just there to try and help and ask questions. And a few weeks later, I converted, and guess what? We've been using that service for the last year. Now this again is where the issue became clear. It was history repeating itself. Follow up. As a result, this method of using a lead form essentially to get a sales call in the diary does work, but it requires really good sales reps to be able to follow up with those leads to be able to schedule them. As a result, I'm putting it slightly above the white paper approach as a B-tier system. But this next system is where we started to unlock consistently high return on ad spend and made everything in the process way easier. So I'd reached the point where I tried 2 systems and I'd seen them both work and not work. But in both cases, the reason that they hadn't worked was because of poor follow-up, which unfortunately we couldn't control. And at the same point in time, my own business was getting way busier, so we didn't have the same amount of time to be able to follow up with leads as the way that we once could. So I needed an easier system, a foolproof system that didn't require the heavy interaction from sales reps. And I knew the solution was giving people more context around our service, basically selling it more. So I took the offers that had worked in our lead forms, and instead I built a landing page around them. And if you want to know what the template we used for this landing page was, it's part of our ads masterclass, and there's a link in the description below. And this is where things popped off. Now, we had a variety of campaigns we ran this across, and in some instances the lead cost actually stayed exactly the same, but in other instances it did increase, and if it did increase, it increased by a factor of 2 times or 3 times on average. We were getting leads that had seen a complete page listing everything we did and had likely also watched a video that explained everything, and they'd then manually taken the time to fill out all of their contact information. And then this was the clincher that made everything else so easy. We added a calendar to the page so that leads could immediately schedule their own time to speak to us. All we had to do was take the calls. And this change alone resulted in an average return on ad spend of 12 times. And as a result, I'm putting this approach as an A-tier approach. However, there is a caveat. This only works if you have a proven offer and you're selling that to a proven audience. So whilst this approach is an A-tier approach, I'd actually recommend starting with the lead form approach so that you can prove your offer and audience. Now, this next approach I'm going to talk about is a little bit more niche, but it takes the idea of giving people more context to the next level. And crucially, it allows you to build a relationship with the prospect on autopilot, which makes sales much easier. Now, a core psychological principle from the world of dating is behind the success of this next approach. Now, I used to follow this dating advice company called Real Social Dynamics. They taught dating advice to me, a 20-year-old anxiety-riddled guy with no idea how to really speak to girls. And everything they put out there was honestly gold. They used to constantly put out YouTube videos giving free advice, and they'd constantly promote these free events, whereby they'd rent out a conference hall in a city nearby and you could go along for free to learn all of the best advice on dating in person. Now their courses ranged from like $2,000 to like $10,000, and you could even spend time one-on-one with the best coaches for like an uncapped amount of money. So to have the opportunity to go along to a free event was just mind-blowingly valuable. Now I consumed their stuff for years, but I never had any money, so unfortunately I never ended up buying anything. But when I was 28, I saw this webinar with a guy I'd been following for years on YouTube, and at the end it promoted this free call that you can have with the coach. So I jumped on this call, and 60 minutes later, sure enough, I'd spent £2,000 on this dating course. And you wanna know what? It was one of the best things I've ever done in my entire life. It completely transformed my confidence and my relationships. And then a few years later, the guy who ran that dating course set up a separate business teaching you business coaching, which I ended up spending a further £8,000 on, and it completely changed my business. And then years later, I was on this one-on-one coaching call with the same guy I'd been following for all of these years, who had helped change my life twice and never really had the need to even sell to me, because I knew that I was going to buy from him. I'd already made up that decision in my mind. But why had I made up that decision? Well, it's because I had so much context. I'd spent so much time consuming his content and putting it into practice that I knew that he could deliver. And also on top of that, before I'd ever spoken to him, it felt like I knew him. And that just shows how education is an insanely powerful tool to building trust with your audience. And this next approach uses that exact same formula. It's using webinars with lead forms. We started using this approach for companies that found they needed to build relationships with customers before they were willing to buy from them. Things like professional services or consultation services. And my God, did it work. The latest campaign we ran had an average lead cost of £44.50 for a webinar sign up, and we pushed them to a pre-recorded webinar so they didn't have to constantly do it manually. And it resulted in one of the most successful marketing campaigns of that company's history. Now this approach works, but it relies on your ability to firstly deliver a really good webinar and also be able to nurture the leads and deliver that content. So if educating leads and using webinars and free events, things like that, is something you already do, this approach is insanely good. And if that is what you do and you just need to scale up, congratulations, you literally just hit the jackpot.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
However, if you have no experience with this, you'll likely struggle with it to begin with. Not because the system doesn't work, but because you probably won't be good enough at the content or the webinar to be able to nurture the leads properly. And as a result, I'm putting this method as an A-tier approach because it does work, but it requires lead nurturing and content to be able to make it really effective at converting the leads. Now, at the start, I mentioned there was a secret fifth approach, and I'll be honest, I've hidden it from you. It's S-tier. But if you skip the rest of the video to get to this, it's not going to make sense. Do you want to know why? Because this last approach is a combination of all those previous approaches. And in this video right here, I've broken that funnel down from start to finish, showing you all of the intricacies of it so that you can copy it and get it into your marketing right now.